At least that makes sense. By that, I mean what we heard last week. When God appears the enemy, at least that makes sense. And by sense, I mean that it's not hard to figure out that a holy God, a righteous God, a God who is absolutely and completely obsessed with his law, would look at the likes of us and be angry, sinners as we are. At least that makes sense, that God would appear the enemy. That's not hard to figure out. But this is something else entirely, isn't it? What do you do when God doesn't look like, doesn't sound like, doesn't seem like God at all? I mean, if anyone could have related, certainly it would have been Jesus. Right? But not even so much as a word. If anyone could relate, it would have been Jesus, who was led out into the wilderness for 40 days to be tempted by the devil himself. If anyone would have compassion on someone possessed of demons, it would have to be him. But not a word. No, the Canaanite woman who comes begging and pleading Jesus, help me, my daughter is possessed. She doesn't even get so much as a sharp or a stern rebuke. She gets worse than that. She gets silence. As if she were so small, she were so insignificant that Jesus' time couldn't be wasted on the likes of her. What do you do when God doesn't look like God? God doesn't sound like God, when God doesn't seem like God? Well, it's in those times that we need the perspective provided today. And the perspective, namely, is this: that God's no is always more than it's cracked up to be. It's a matter of perspective. That's known as the impossible triangle. It doesn't look like a triangle at all. It looks like bad goalposts. It's in Perth, Australia. When Moses stood on top of Sinai, as we heard in the reading from Exodus chapter 33, he stood there in what could be considered the most disconcerting of circumstances imaginable. He had been led up Mount Sinai because of all of the rebellion of the people of Israel. You might remember Mount Sinai, right, as the one where when the people had come out of Egypt, they stopped there because God said, we're stopping here. His glorious, visible manifestation, that is kind of a smoky, cloudy, fiery figure that went before and followed behind them, it had stopped there. And God says, here's what we're going to do. We're going to have a holy assembly, and everybody's going to come. Everybody is going to come and hear. Only nobody is going to set foot on the mountain. Not animal, not person, nobody. Because I'm going to be on the mountain. And anyone who sets foot on the mountain will die. They will not meet a good ending. But you, Moses, you come up here. We're going to talk one-on-one. And so Moses he went up on Sinai. He stood in the presence of the Lord. And it was at that time that God gave to his servant Moses the 10 Commandments, the covenant that God was going to establish between himself and his people Israel, a covenant that was going to make them unique, that was going to set them apart, that was intended to draw all nations to them by way of their radically different life. Of course, you know what happens while Moses is up there too. As he's communing with God, the people are down below. Not satisfied in how long it's taking, they convince Moses' siblings of all people to make for them a golden calf so that they could worship it and bow down to it, and God was not pleased. His anger burned. He became so vehemently angry that he cast Moses himself out of his presence. Get out of here. I want nothing to do with you, and I want nothing to do with these people. They can die in the wilderness for all I care. Moses had no choice but to descend down Sinai and see what was going on in camp. And he loses it. He smashes the tablets of stone on which God had etched the commandments. And it's after all of that mess, all of that brokenness, all of that rebellion. He ventures back up Sinai of all places, the lone representative of the people, to beg God to reconsider. And that's where this text kind of picks up. Moses begs God, if you do not go along with us, if you do not keep your word, we will certainly be lost. And God says, well, I'll send an angel with you. And Moses says, no, it can't be. It needs to be you. It has to be you. Why should the heathens talk about God in such a derogatory way that he let his people out only to slaughter them? It has to be you. You have to keep your word. The promise of the Savior depends on it. And God says, I will go with you. What an incredible high for Moses, who had beseeched God, who had begged his mercy on behalf of the people and received exactly what he had prayed for by holding God to his word. And then, whether Moses spoke it out of exuberance or confusion, kind of like Peter on Transfiguration, or out of something more nefarious, then the statement, now show me your glory. And one has to wonder what Moses had in mind, because in point of fact, Moses, better than anyone, had seen the manifestation of God's glory. He saw it out in the wilderness when it looked like a fire on a bush that didn't burn up. And he was so curious as to why this bush wouldn't burn up, so that he approaches and God says, take off your sandals. The place where you are standing is holy ground. Moses falls face down into the sand, understanding God is holy and he is sinful. He had seen it up on top of Sinai as he had been there. He had seen it going before and following after as they crossed through the Red Sea. He had seen it. So what could he possibly mean by now show me your glory? Well, it's a matter of perspective. What Moses was asking of God wasn't to see a hidden manifestation of God, a cloudy, fiery, smoky pillar, a fire on a bush that didn't burn up. What Moses was asking of God was to know him, intimately know him, to understand him, to be on an equal footing. God says, no. No, it cannot be. It Cannot be, because you are sinful and I am holy, and you have zero chance of understanding me. I'll show you my goodness. I'll proclaim my name, and I'll do it because I want to. I'll have mercy on whomever I'll have mercy. I'll have compassion on whomever I'll have compassion. I know you by name because I wanted it that way. But you cannot see me and live. What do you do when God doesn't look like God? When he seems so petty? I mean, was it that big of a deal to just show Moses so that he could confidently go back down the mountain with something a little bit more than, yeah, God said we're okay, let's go? Was that asking too much? What do you do when God doesn't look like God, when he won't let you see him as he is, when he settles for hiding in places and things that are so ordinary to boot? Clouds? Fire? Earthquakes, lightning, thunder, all things so ordinary, so naturally occurring, even if they are spectacular. What do? When God doesn't look like God? It's not hard to relate with Moses, is it? We sit in Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin, 2,000 years removed from the day God walked earth. And even that is so ordinary. Jesus is the one whom we worship. Jesus is the one whom we adore. And what was he? A guy. And an average guy at that. Not a king, not a priest, in the human sense of the word. Wasn't some super heroic figure, not a great conqueror, not a legendary statesman. He was a guy with average disciples and average friends, who grew up in an average town with average parents, who did average things like sleep and eat and cry. That's who we worship. That's the God. We throw all of our eggs into his basket. You can understand where Moses was coming from, can't you? Haven't you ever thought, in the crucible of life, man, it would be nice if just one time God would look like God? Because you hear the voices whispering, you hear the people that chuckle, that laugh, that shake their head, but you tell them that you believe in Jesus. So naive. Wouldn't it be nice if God would just show us? If we could just see him as he is, then we would know. And God says, no. You cannot understand me. God had a better alternative for Moses when he told him no. So I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll put you in a crack, a cleft, a cave. I'll put you in a cleft, and I'll cover over it with my hand, and then I'll cause all of me, my whole me, I'll cause all of me to pass by. I'll protect you with my righteous right hand. You, Moses, who has no business to ask this of me, who has no possibility of understanding me. I'll do this for you. I'll put you in a cleft, and I'll put my right hand, my righteous right hand, my omnipotent, powerful hand over you, and I will pass by all of me. And then when I'm passed by, for a rear end like you, I'll show you my back. And it's right there that Moses is given the perspective he needs. viewed from the right angle, suddenly what is impossible becomes absolutely mystifying. That same impossible triangle, viewed from the right angle, looks all of a sudden like a triangle and not busted goalposts. And then you study it a little more closely and you see that the reason it's called impossible is because it is a mathematical impossibility. It's consisting of 390-degree angles. It can't be. Suddenly, God gives Moses perspective. And hiding him in that cave and covering over him with his hand and allowing him to see his backside. God shows himself to Moses as he actually is, a God who will not come in vengeance, a God who will not prove himself to peons like us, but a God who will go above the fray and do whatever is necessary for the sake of his people, in order that they might trust, in order that they might believe, in order that they might have faith. And you can relate to that too. How many times hasn't God put you into the darkness of the cleft or the cave? How many times hasn't he put you into a situation where you couldn't see and you knew nothing about what was going on, and the wind swirled and howled and the earth seemed to move and everything was just chaos, but God's righteous right hand covered you and protected you and kept you safe. And then in the aftermath, as he removes his hand from your eyes so that you might see, you have the perspective that you need. This God who shows himself by hiding, shows you his love, his mercy, his compassion, his trustworthiness, as he makes indeed every last thing work out for you. See, God's no is always more than it is cracked up to be. We see it most keenly, most especially in his Son, Jesus. The God of all power, wisdom, authority, and holiness packed all of that deity in human flesh. Yes, this Jesus who was so ordinary was extraordinary. He was God in the flesh, mystifying and more than that triangle. An impossibility, we say. No, it is true. This one who packed all of the deity of the Godhead into a body, into flesh and blood, and for what purpose? To die. To die for you. So that we might one day see him as he actually is, see him face to face in the glory of heaven. So friends, take heart, because God's no is always more than it's cracked up to be. Amen.